Hey, Jacob here at Pusher TV. Today we're going to do another install video of just about everything we got for the new Ford 6.7s. I got a 2018 behind me. These parts are going to fit your 17 through 19 trucks. We also have other kits all the way down to 2011. There's so many parts to this kit I can barely hold them all, but basically we're going to do our cold side and cold air intake package, which is our intake manifold, cold side charge tube, cold air intake, and then the customer optioned in the hot side as well. So let's go lay these things out on the table so you can see all the major components, talk about them, and then get started. So we have all of our major components laid out here on the bench. You can see they're in one of our signature colors called titanium. I love this color. It's awesome at hiding dirt and scratches. Goes with pretty much any body color truck. It's really a good go-to color. Let's go through all this in the order the air is going to flow through it. So first it's going to go through our 45 cal air filter that has an inverted cone on the end. These things are awesome. We've been testing these things forever on a lot of different applications, from off-road racing to drag racing, and they're great. I'm really happy with how these filters perform. Next is going to come up through the air box. This is a full 6061 air box here, fully TIG welded. It has a nice tinted plexiglass window here so you can keep an eye on your filter with the ghosted pusher logo on the back. This guy is going to seal right to the top of your lower box. Then the air is going to pass through our 4-inch intake tube here. You can see we have provisions for your factory filter minder, which again helps you keep an eye on that filter. Also a fully CNC machined MAF sensor block there that accepts your factory MAF sensor. Then last but not least, it's going to hook to your charger via this heavy duty coupler and stainless clamps. And then also this kit comes with a crankcase ventilation reroute kit, which is this machine adapter to go to your factory crankcase ducting and hose to route that for you. After it goes through the charger, it's going to come through your hot side charge tube here. This guy has a CNC machined adapter on the end with an O-ring groove, so that's going to use your factory C-clip that you'll see later that snaps over the charger and has an O-ring on the inside to seal to the charger, a lot like the factory unit does. And then we're going to connect to our intercooler with a nice heavy duty coupler here and full stainless T-bolt clamps. A quick note, all of our silicone couplers are rated to be run in compounds. We design them that way. All of our components are that way. Then we're going to come out of our intercooler through another heavy-duty coupler and clamps through our cold side charge tube, which you can see has CNC machine ports for our intake air temp sensor, as well as auxiliary 1/8-inch MPT ports. 1/8-inch MPT thread is your most common thread for boost gauge pickup, water meth injectors, nitrogen injectors, that type of stuff. If you don't have a use for these at the time of install, in your hardware kit will always come a matching number of anodized aluminum plugs to seal those guys off and keep your boost inside the tube. As your air exits the tube, you're going to go through another heavy-duty coupler assembly here, and then what is probably my favorite piece of the whole setup is our intake manifold. This guy is awesome. It does an amazing job at splitting your air perfectly between each cylinder bank. We form the ends to match the inlets of the valve covers exactly, and then use O-rings here to seal, a lot like the factory upper manifold does, so that you can take this thing on and off as many times as you want and not worry about gaskets. Also, we have a CNC machined sensor port for your MAP sensor, as well as a dipstick mount for your engine oil and transmission dipstick tubes here. So that wraps up pretty much your major components. We'll go through some of the minor hardware as we do the install later. Let's get these things on the truck. So first off, all of our products come with a complete set of instructions that are totally step-by-step with all the pictures, all the information you'll ever need for that install. This video is intended to be another tool for you, give you a couple different angles of view just to help you feel comfortable and hopefully make you more efficient at doing this install. So let's get started. I'm going to start removing parts pretty much in the order of how the air flows through the system. So that would mean we're going to start with our cold air first. On your cold air, you have your mass airflow sensor here. We're just going to unplug that. There's a little safety lock on it. That little red guy slides back and allows you to push on the little tab and pull it off. Back here's our filter minder. We'll mess with that later. Then your lid is just secured to the lower box by 4 little quick snaps. That releases your lid from the box. Then we'll come over here. I talk about it a lot. These 1/4-inch impacts are awesome for this type of work. Makes real quick work of the clamps, that type of stuff. Loosen that one clamp there. And then we can just pull this guy off. Set it over here. The rest of the cold air that goes from here to the turbo is cast into this chunk of aluminum as well as your cold side charge air. So we're going to attack this a little later, but for now let's get this guy and our air filter out of the way. Now we can move on to our hot side charge tube. It's secured to the intercooler via a worm drive clamp and then to the turbo outlet via a C-clamp. Let's do our worm drive clamp first. It's actually the same size as the cold air clamps were, which is a 7mm hex. So we'll just pull that guy off the intercooler, and then I like to use 2 flat screwdrivers to get in here and open up the C-clamp. And that's it. Now we're getting into the bulk of the removal process, which is getting our lower intake manifold and upper out of here. There's a few things connected to it to note. We have our crankcase ventilation ducting here. Both our oil, engine oil, and transmission fluid dipstick tubes are connected back here. We're gonna save the bolt that bolts those to the manifold there on the back. Also, we have our map sensor up here and some of its harness over off to the side. We just need to unclip that. So I'm going to get started on loosening the hardware you need to loosen on this. It's quite a bit. We're going to fast forward just to keep this video moving along. Now that I have my hardware that secures my upper manifold to the lower loosened, as well as the hardware that holds this lower manifold to the thermostat bridge, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it out. I actually prefer to pull the lower out from underneath the upper. There's not really that much room between the cowl and the upper to get it out of there. So I'll just lift it up and pull this guy up and out of there. Sometimes this rubber coupler can be a little stiff, and so that, and you want to make sure you have your clamp really loose because there's a pretty good sized lip on the turbo itself. Also, these hoses right here can kind of constrict you from going up. There we go. That guy out. So there's your lower. All right, now that I got the lower out, we're gonna pull the upper. Again, since all that hardware hangs low, it can make it a little tough. We're gonna pull the driver side part of it out first. Kind of twist it out like that. You can see all that hardware kind of hangs down. It can kind of catch on stuff, so just take your time with it. Now we can start prepping all the components that are gonna go on the truck. We'll start with the cold air first. We're going to take our MAF sensor out, which you can see has some torque screws. They're T20s. We're not going to reuse those screws because they're actually a screw thread for the plastic. And also, like I mentioned earlier, our intake has provisions for the factory filter minder, so we're just going to pull that out gently. So we have the filter minder, and then we actually have to pull the grommet itself out. We're going to go ahead. I like to use silicone spray on a lot of the rubber / silicone type O-rings, connections, stuff like that. That'll help this guy go back in the hole. And then we'll do the same on our filter minder. So that guy's ready. Now we're going to put our mass airflow sensor in. If you look at your bolt pattern, it's kind of asymmetric, and so you can't put the mass airflow sensor in incorrectly. If you do, the bolt holes won't line up. Now we're just going to take our M4 button head bolts that are supplied in the kit. Go ahead and put those guys in to secure this guy. Now I like to go ahead and work on the filter box lid after this. Let's move on to that. Now we can prep our air box lid. So this guy seals to the top of your air box, and so we supply the sticky back foam tape here to go around the bottom to help seal the lid. I like to start the seam of the tape right here. This will be directly under where the tube comes out of the air box lid. And you're just going to go and run the outside line of your tape around flush with the outside of the airbox lid. Pull your, so when you're backing off, so you can see here, we supply a little more than you need just to make life a little easier. I'll just trim that guy. So that sits in there. There you go. And then now we can go ahead and give this thing a nice little press down. Make sure we get our adhesive really well stuck to that. Now that guy's ready. I like to pre-assemble the intake lid and tube kind of together. And the way you do that is you put on your bushing here that kind of cushions the tube and seals it to the lid. Basically, you're going to push this thing on so your shoulder is back here, and the other end just ends up just flush there. And so you can see the orientation I have here. The tube is kind of relaxed on the table. The mass airflow sensor is kind of there on the bottom. We're going to take our lid. We're going to flip it upside down. And then this edge here is going to be parallel to the table. This will still be able to move, but that gets it in the basic orientation. It'll end up in the truck. Then we're going to take our air filter, loosen our clamp a little bit. You can set this guy up just so we can get to the clamp from the underside here. So we're just going to push that filter all the way on. It's going to basically sandwich your air box between the shoulder on that bushing and the end of the air filter. Now I always rotate my metal seam of the filter down towards the bottom. And you come in here. Okay, that guy's nice and tight. You can still have just a little bit of adjustment of the airbox lid, so it's no big deal. Once you get it in the truck, you can adjust your orientation a little bit if you need to. That guy's all set up now. Now let's move on to our hot side charge tube. You may have noticed already I always make a nice little bit of bubble wrap underneath the parts. It makes it really easy to work on them and not worry about scratching them. This all came around the products that came, in the kit, so it's really nice and convenient thing to have. All you really need to do is put this O-ring in. I'm just going to insert it in the machine groove inside the adapter on this end. Make sure it's seated in there nicely. And then this fitting uses the same C-clip that came in the factory charge tube. So we just need to pop this little piece of plastic off right here to free that clip up, like that. So this guy will come out of here. And this guy is going to kind of be in like this orientation. So we'll put the little saddle of the clip on that one right there. And then when we go to install this thing will just push right over the charger, and the charger will expand this a little bit, and then it'll fall right into the groove that's on the charger that retains it. Now moving on to our cold side charge tube. First things first, we got to pull out our intake air temperature sensor. It twists out. There's a little bit of a ramp on the other side of this tab that keeps it from twisting out on its own, so you just got to lift that up a little bit and twist it to the left. See that little ramp in there? That guy right there keeps that tab from twisting. So we're done with this guy. Now this charge tube, if you're looking at your engine, you're standing where I'm at, this guy's going to kind of sit in this orientation. So I prefer to have this section of the tab facing up. So we're going to put our sensor in. Silicone spray, it's where it's at. Helps a lot with your O-rings, your couplers, all that stuff. Helps give it that little bit of lube to get in there and compress the O-ring. Okay. So you can see this little hold down slides over the sensor and over that section of the tab, and you can also use it to kind of rotate your sensor into the correct orientation that it goes. Now that we have our bracket lined up with the hole, we can go ahead and thread in our M5 bolt. Get that guy snug down. As I mentioned earlier, our cold side charge tube comes with auxiliary 1/8 inch MPT ports. This customer doesn't have a use for them at this moment. So we're just going to put in the supplied plugs that come in the kit. Just a little bit of Teflon paste to help them seal. To prep our intake manifold, we need to pull the map sensor off the factory upper manifold. And we're going to go ahead and put that in here. I'm going to use the supplied M5 bolt to hold that in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and insert our O-rings in the O-ring grooves. Also, when I go to set this thing in place, I like to go ahead and put our flange hardware in the back bolt holes. So there's 2 on the back side of each flange. I'll just set them in there. You just have to be careful as you're holding this thing over the engine that you don't bump those really hard and they fall off, but so far it's worked out really well. You can just set them in there and they'll stay in place, and then you can just reach back there and thread them in. We're going to set up our crankcase ventilation reroute real quick. You can see the old ducting here. It's got that quick release coupler there. And then I've already started routing my hose down the back of the engine. I like to go between the two hard supply and return fuel lines there, and then go back there once I get it all set up, and I'll do some zip ties to secure it. Again, little silicone spray, run some in the hose, help this adapter go in easy. You don't need any type of hose clamp here. There's really no pressure in this thing at all. And then we're going to let this guy do the curve around. Go ahead and clip it on like that. Let that guy go down the back side of the engine, then I'll go down there and I'll add a couple zip ties just to secure that hose. You just want to keep it off anything that's moving, like we have the steering shaft over here, and then luckily anything that's hot is pretty much exists from here over, so you have a pretty good swath for that hose to go down the back and be away from anything that could damage it. We're going to deviate from our past assembly methods and do our intake manifold first instead of doing the cold air first. I like to do it because you have the most access to these flange bolts everywhere. Like I showed you before, I like to put the bolts in on the back flange holes. That's something you do at your own risk. But I like to do it because it's more convenient. As long as you don't hit the manifold really hard, they don't fall out. Now we're just going to thread these guys in so that we know they're at least threaded in to some degree. Then we'll put the rest in and tighten this guy down. You'll notice that we supply stainless washers with all of our hardware, and that just keeps your powder coated surfaces looking really nice, so you want to make sure you add those in. I got those guys snugged. I'm going to go around and torque them, and then right back here where I pointed out earlier is where your dipstick's going to mount. Once I have all that other hardware torqued, I'll add that bolt in and torque it, but right now it's nice to move these dipstick tubes out of the way to get to the flange hardware. And then you also want to make sure that you plug in your map sensor once your flange hardware is torqued down. Now that we have our intake manifold set in and all torqued down, you just want to make sure that you get your map sensor plugged back in, which I have already. I have the harness routed underneath the manifold. Setting it up like this will, at a later date, if you do compounds, clear up that area for our intermediate exhaust pipe to come through here and not heat up that sensor at all. Also, our dipstick tubes are bolted down. You also want to just make sure that this guy here is not touching the front of the manifold or the fuel filter housing here. Now we can resume basically following the flow path of air for our install. So we'll go ahead and place our heavy duty silicone coupler here on the front of the charger. You just push that guy all the way on. And we'll go ahead and set our two clamps on there. The one that's going to clamp this coupler to the charger inlet can be tightened right now. There's not going to really be any adjustment here on this coupler since it's a straight one. These little wobble drive extensions work really nice for stuff like this. I highly recommend them. So now I can just go get the whole cold air assembly that we did on the bench and just kind of set it on there. So I got my whole assembly we did on the bench here. So I'll slip it underneath this coolant line here. Slide it all the way into that coupler. And then just set our lid there and align it with the top of the box. And do our snaps. Set up our clamp. I'm pretty particular about my clamps. I really like them lined up and the hexes all facing the same way and the same position. Okay, you guys in there, and now all you gotta do is plug in our MAP sensor. Make sure to clip in your little red lock there. And that wraps it up for that. Next up on our flow path is a hot side charge tube. We've already done our O-ring and C-clip install previously. I'm going to put a little silicone spray on that O-ring to help it slide on nice and easy. Also, I highly recommend using silicone spray on all your coupler connections. The couplers we supply are really heavy duty. And they're pretty strong, so you can definitely use a little lubrication to help them position good. There's really no detriment to this stuff. I've found it not to affect the couplers holding at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide that guy on so there's about an inch hanging off, and then we can go ahead and position our clamps. I'm gonna have them oriented on this side so that they're really easy to get to. So we can just go ahead and put the one for the tube on that, and then the other one, we'll go ahead and place it on the intercooler. Now we're just gonna feed this guy on the charger, and you see how that clip expanded and then dropped back in. You heard that telltale snap. That means it's on there. You can give it a good yank, make sure it's all nice and seated. Now we can go back over here and just slide our coupler off the charge tube onto the intercooler. And get our clamp kind of started and rotate it back up here. All right, so that guy's seated all the way onto the intercooler now. We can just position our clamps and tighten them down. So our last charge tube is going to be the cold side, which is going to route up through here to the intake manifold. So we'll go ahead and place our couplers. I like to have the clamps at the manifold connection, have the T-bolt side facing over towards the passenger side and underneath, kind of hides them. So I'll slide that one on. Again, more silicone spray. Silicone spray for the win today. I'm going to just push that guy pretty much all the way on, like that. Also, these hoses here are going to be kind of in our way, so we'll pull this body clip to get us some more flexibility to feed that charge tube in. We do have a really cool coolant reroute kit that reroutes all this stuff in a much cleaner manner, so it's not laying on top of all your nice new charge tubes anymore. So go check that out. So our cold side charge tube we have all ready. The only thing we need to do, or what I prefer to do, is position the coupler that goes on the intercooler ahead of time. You'll see it has a little bit shorter leg on one side and a little bit longer on the other. The longer leg is going to go on the charge tube. So we'll use some more silicone spray here to help us get that guy nice and adjusted. So I like to hold my charge tube kind of in the orientation above the motor that it's going to go. We'll get that inlet kind of, or outlet lined up with the inlet of the manifold, and then we'll get this side kind of pointing directly 90 degrees to like your line of travel. And so that'll get a thing positioned really close to where it needs to be. Also, I'll go ahead and place my clamp for the intercooler outlet in place. I like to have it generally in like this orientation when it's done. So I'll feed this guy in on the back side like this. Okay, so I have that sitting on the intercooler. Now I want to go ahead and line this up here. Get that coupler in place. You can go ahead and place these clamps on this tube if you want. I prefer not to have them sitting there rubbing around on the powder coat, so I'll go ahead and place them afterwards. And then this guy, I actually prefer to have it kind of in this orientation. It'll have the T-bolt facing backwards. There's a good gap of room back there to have your hand back there and tighten it with a wrench. Okay, so I have all my clamps kind of in place, my couplers kind of in place. I'm just going to make minor adjustments, check my clearances everywhere, get everything aligned, and tighten everything. That intercooler outlet clamp you can get to with a setup like this real easy. And then the other two over there real easy. This one back here I use a short stubby ratchet that I'll show you in a minute. So I'll get this guy placed. Make sure I'm happy with kind of the overall position of the tube. So I'm pretty happy right there. Go. So now I know I can tell both my beads are seated in this hump really nicely. Everything's aligned really well. And this guy here is a really nice little combo for reaching that one down on the charge tube. You can tighten these clamps really tight. They'll take it, our charge tubes will handle it. Everything we make, like I said before, is designed to be able to be run in a compound system. So you don't have to worry about over tightening the clamps on this stuff if you have a truck that makes a lot of boost. Snap in our little hose retainer there. Make sure we get our intake temp sensor plugged back in. And then you can do some work on this type of stuff, get it snapped back in and clean that up in that area. We'll probably go ahead and do our coolant reroute on this after this. But I'm going to go back over all of our clamps on this type of stuff, make sure everything's adjusted correctly, and make sure all my clamps are good and tight. Now to put the icing on the cake, we're going to install our tinted plexiglass window. Just need to slide on your C-clip nuts first onto the holes here on the lid. Also, if you've noticed my, I believe it's Princess Jasmine Band-Aid that I stole from my daughter's stash, give me a like. Okay, all those guys are in. And then also, I pre-placed the little rubber grommets that come with all the hardware for the window. Set that guy there. Gonna make sure these guys are seated down in all the way. You don't really need to crank these things down, you just want to compress those rubber grommets. About a full turn or so. That's it. that's a wrap for this install. Everything's good and tight. I can't say it enough. I like to go over my clamps like 10 times, just maybe some OCD I've developed over the years. I would definitely go over everything, all your hardware again, make sure all your tools are out of the engine bay and whatnot. I'm gonna throw one of the stickers on that's always come with all of our kits. I like them kind of like right about here. And especially once you do the coolant reroute I was talking about and these hoses get out of the way, it's a great placement for the logo. That's it. We're done with this guy. I can't say how excited I always am at the end of these things. This setup makes this truck run so much better. It makes for a way happier, healthier truck. If you have any questions about what we did, there's a lot of information on our site. If you can't find it there, we're here for you. Give us a call, shoot us an email, and thanks for watching.